So this is not going to be a fun video unless you're slightly sadistic like most of BookTube, which I probably shouldn't call out before I make this video, but I'm not making this video though to like call out authors. Like I am calling them out, but you know, over half of them are dead. So yeah, actually not half of them. They're dead in my author heart. This is not getting any better. And I'm gonna give some trigger warnings so far, and this is racism, Nazism, homophobia, and genocide. And there'll be other mentions of other stuff, but those are the things that I'm gonna be deeply going into. This is 5 authors that I loved these books, but I don't talk about them. I don't really want to talk about them because their authors are incredibly problematic in ways that I can't excuse. And why am I doing this? Most of these books I read a fair amount of time ago, but I still have thoughts on them and I want to express those thoughts. So please be mindful, I am talking about them. The first one is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. This is no surprise. Many people know that he is incredibly homophobic and just wants to like in prison and jail and keep people who are gay from being in public office and many other things. I have not looked up his things for many years. When I discovered that he was like this, I went in and read a bunch of articles, read a bunch of things. He's very unapologetically anti-gay and very homophobic, and he's proud of it, which, yeah, no. I read Ender's Game a long time before I started BookTube. I have fond memories about it. A friend of mine read it to me and it was on a car ride when I was very sick and I was just like so enthralled, and then I went home and I was really sick and I finished it. It is about a young boy who is a prodigy. He gets taken by the space organization and they make him into a soldier, and I thought it was very interesting. You know, it might be a little cliche of an ending, but I do think that the ending is very brilliant. It was very brilliant for me as a teenager and I enjoyed it a lot. And it was really my first full foray into science fiction and I absolutely loved it. Do I support him as an author? No, but those are my thoughts about the book. And my second one also doesn't have any super problematic things in the actual book, but once you research the author, then you're like, oh wait, no. So this one is Personae by Ezra Pound. I read this in 2018 and I loved it. It has a lot of like fairy tales and mythology and like Arthurian stuff, and it's just beautiful, gorgeous poetry. And I was like, oh my goodness, I had read about 40 of them and I had about 2 left, and I looked up Ezra Pound. And he's a literal Nazi. He's an American Nazi. He is a person who defected from the United States and got banished by his own country because he was like, yes, I love Nazism. Yeah, super white supremacist, super terrible person. And even though it doesn't come into this book, it still just makes me really uncomfortable. And I was like, yay, new favorite poet. And I was like, nope, no favorite poet. So yeah, that's Ezra Pound. Don't like him. And then we have the first live author, and this is the only author on the list that, actually no, Orson Scott Card is alive. I just forget because he's very old and he doesn't publish traditional. Maybe he's still publishing, but people don't read him. Anyways, this isn't the only author on the list that I would consider reading more authors from. This is where the disappointed instead of the malicious comes in, and this is TJ Clune and The House on the Cerulean Sea. I was enjoying this. It's fluffy and beautiful, and even though it's not completely my cup of tea, it definitely had some fat phobia and like some uncomfortability. It stars with a man who is 39 years old and he is a caseworker on magical orphans, and he travels and he spends his time going through and kind of telling if the homes are safe or not, and he ends up going to this top risk one where there's like the Antichrist and this female gnome and like all of these people that are doing stuff, and he gets to learn about them, and he is supposed to kind of try to close the thing, and of course he doesn't because it's a good school. So none of that is incredibly problematic. I was reading it though and I was like, this seems a little bit like it's talking about indigenous schools and like, you know, problematic things there. And yeah, no, he totally was doing that. Mind you, I'm saying this as a white person, but I do think that it can be possible for white people with a lot of research, a lot of sensitivity writing, and a lot of just important insight to write tales that aren't their own. I think that that can be important, or especially use places and use analogy for topics about racism and stuff like that. I think that that can be a good thing, as long as you're doing it in a way. I think that it's also important to be knowledgeable about the fact that you might be taking up space from an author of color to write their own story. So with all of that, and then Clune kind of put his foot in his mouth when he talked about the fact that he had learned about it in history and that he learned about residential schools, which is a thing that the Canadian government did, and I believe the American as well, in which, you know, thousands and thousands of kids were taken for over 90 years and only closed in 1996 from about 1890. And they institutionalized them, and they did a lot of awful things like beating people for speaking their own language, purposely making sure that they do not resemble their things by cutting their hair, separating them from family, making sure that they can only return for summers, and many of them never could. I will leave learning more about residential schools and the 60 scoop in the thing. I have spoken to people who are survivors of 60 schools and residential schools and read documentaries and stuff like that, and all of it is incredibly heartbreaking, as he said, and something that needs to be talked about more. The issue is that the schools represented aren't... The big issue coming in here is that the schools that are represented on page in Cerulean House aren't actually like evil, like they aren't bad. And they're schools, which residential schools were not schools. They were pretty much like labor camps for people without education, without food, incredible amount of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. And like to show that into a fluffy, like kind of rom-com coming of age and fish out of water story in which, you know, a man finds his place and finds his lover, and that, you know, the people who are the marginalized group are represented as monsters is, yeah, no, not great. And also the fact that it's solved by the government worker, and that it's solved, and that, you know, it's just an issue of bureaucracy. Like, it's not an issue of actual systemic issues. Him to claim it outwardly, out loud, really bothers me. I'm obviously not the person to talk about it, but it definitely made me angry. But you really didn't need to claim that you were kind of representing it. And he does acknowledge his white privilege in talking about it, but it's still really messy. So will I read Clune again? Maybe, I don't know. I'm not as enthusiastic about reading him as I was when I started the book, but I don't think that he did it out of a malicious thing, but he definitely disappointed me. Number 4 might be the most insidious of that, and that I mean like secret evil. Because Flattery O'Connor, throughout much of her life and throughout, you know, public things until her diaries became known, was represented as a Southern Gothic writer who was fairly progressive. And yeah, no, she wasn't. To quote herself, I am a segregationalist by heart, but an integrationalist by spirit and politics. Pretty much, she didn't like Black people very much. And, you know, she didn't keep that out of her writing. I was, like, reading her stories, and this is a collection of short stories, and, you know, it's very famous and still widely talked about, so I wasn't expecting it to be bad. It also came out in the 50s, so, like, fairly late on the, like, massively racist and ignored list. But, you know, I'm reading this, and I'm like, I keep on seeing people who are Black showing up and being called the N-word, and being called in like terrible ways, and they're never given names, and they're pretty much just there to exist, and that like the one moment when they're given feelings, it's to certify the like emotionalness of the white person. And like pretty much throughout, I was just like, this is making me incredibly uncomfortable. Like I stopped during like several stories because I was like, oh my goodness, no, I can't. And I kept on reading online, and they were like, yeah, no, this is a good story. She's against racism. And I was like, is she? And then we have the thing is that she wrote privately about, you know, how uncomfortable Black people made her and how uncomfortable integration happened. But she was like, I can't support it. So like, she thought the right thing was integration, but she wouldn't actually want integration because she didn't like Black people, but she thought they were human. So, you know, that's something. Even though many of these stories are well written and they have disability representation, which is something that is nice. Throughout several of the stories that feature prominent Black characters, and especially the last story, I was like so physically ill just reading it. I was like, this is, how is this so popular? And how is like no one writing about the fact that like she's incredibly problematic? So yeah. Flattery O'Connor, I wanted to like you. I really wanted to read more Southern Gothic, but girl, you're racist. So my number 5 is the one where I'm not going to go into details of what he did because honestly I have heard many of them, but I've never cared to research because I do like the idea of keeping the books that I have read by him outside of that thing and recognizing that I don't support him as a person, even though for a long time I followed him on Twitter and Instagram and enjoyed his posts and enjoyed his humor. And yeah, no, this is J. Christoph, who I read Illuminate and Nevernight, and I have also read a few other books by him that I haven't liked as much. And yeah, I really looked forward to many of his novels and enjoyed, you know, his wiry personality and stuff like that. And then yeah, a lot of things started coming out. Like he was always a little questionable. But you know, like I thought when he was talking about like Nevernight, he has a review being like, this is not for kids. Like, you know, we're talking about, even though the characters are teenagers and stuff like that, we're talking about sex and we're talking about gore and stuff like that. And then he started saying a lot of stuff that was like, yeah, no, this ain't okay, man. So yeah, no, I'm not gonna be reading Jay Kristoff in the thing. And if you want to know everything there is to know about Jay Kristoff, just like Google his name and you will have many, many loads. The obvious one that many people thought I would probably talk about is J.K. Rowling. She was kind of problematic from the time that I started reading her, because I only started reading her in 2017, 2016, and I mostly read her book in 2018. So some of the stuff was already known, and I had only finished the books a year before her comments about trans stuff started coming out, and I was like, you're not allowed to weaponize your own feelings of fear as a woman into hating other women. Don't do that, woman. Yeah, so I was rereading the series at the time. I stopped. I can't even look at the books. Like, I kept the books off my shelves where you can see them, and one day I'll probably read them to my kids, but I don't know if I'll feel comfortable doing that. But yeah, she's kind of the predictable one. We all kind of know what's happening there, and that she's not as inclusive as she claims to be, and that she's also very, like, pretty much most others were pretty much open about their like things, like pretty open about the way that they felt. But yeah, no, she's just like, no, I'm a supporter of trans people, but also I hate them. This was a fun video to film. Nothing like hatred and bigotry to make one thing. On one final note, I did find it interesting that I did not include any authors that were sexist or misogynist. And I thought it was very interesting because I was like, I know that like many authors are, but maybe because it's something that's against me, I don't feel the same hatred. I don't know. There's probably more authors that I should be concerned about, but these are the main ones, and especially by books. Like, there's other books that I don't like, but these are books that I actually like but won't talk about on my channel going forward, or haven't really talked about in my channel in a long time or ever because of that. But I wanted to talk about it and just have a discussion about these books. And I hope that you enjoyed or didn't enjoy, because it wasn't really a fun video, but leave a comment on your thoughts. Leave a comment by a book you're disappointed. I don't really mean this to be a place where like we hate people. I don't really want this to be a place where like this person is the worst, because I don't know. I think much more in vilifying actions than deeds, but I do think that supporting people with a platform and should be given a chance to grow as a human, but I also think that there's a degree of repentance and a degree of wanting to change for that. And yeah, I still also don't think that you should just, as someone who's so anti-drama, I probably shouldn't have made this video, but this is also people that are well established and people kind of know these things about them. So I don't feel like it's drama. I feel like it's just a video I wanted to make. Anyways, long outro. I do find this an interesting question. Where is the line for you on when you cut someone off as an artist or as a writer? Have a better day than I did with these authors, and goodbye. I really wanted to read more Sothic. I really wanted to read more Sothic